There's been a lot of talk over whether or not we should possibly bring back Marxist ideas to the United States of America. I'm a skeptic because I've been studying history and economics for a long time, but I realize there's a lot of intellectual people, very smart people, who believe strongly that Marxist ideas are great ideas and they shouldn't be thrown out in the dustbin of history, and that we need to bring them back. And so I wanted to get to the bottom of what Marxism is all about, especially neo-Marxists, because I thought initially that, oh, they want to bring back the just handing over the means of production to the government. What are the means of production? It's the means of producing people. It's the means that it takes to produce a society and a system. So Zoran Mandabi, who's going to be mayor of New York, it looks like, very much loves that idea of handing over the means of production to the government and under their control, or the proletariat, and back into the hands of the people, using democracy to usher that in. And I'm not so concerned in making everybody believe that I'm right and you are wrong. I'm more concerned about understanding the point of view of the Marxists and essentially steel manning your ideas, because it feels to me like the Democratic Party has been really captivated by this idea of Marxism. The far left is really in control right now. I would argue that it's AOC and Bernie Sanders who are the leaders of the party, and Zoran Mandabi might be a leader, Gavin Newsom. And I kind of interested what the Democratic Party is going to be looking like and shaping up to look like after all of these the defeats and upsets. And I think they've also been damaged greatly by the assassination of Charlie Kirk and how that's going to pan out. And so I have a few clips I want to show you that go into what is the spirit of Marxism and what did Marx believe and how did that shape into neo-Marxism.
Modern work is alienated. One of Marx's greatest insights is that work can be one of the sources of our greatest joys. But in order to be fulfilled at work, Marx wrote that workers need to see themselves in the objects they have created. Think of the person who built this chair. It's straightforward, strong, honest, and elegant. It's an example of how, at its best, labour offers us a chance to externalise what's good inside us. But this is increasingly rare in the modern world. Part of the problem is that modern work is incredibly specialised. Specialised jobs make the modern economy highly efficient, but they also mean that it's seldom possible for any one worker to derive a sense of the genuine contribution they might be making to the real needs of humanity. Marx argued that modern work leads to alienation, Entfremdung. In other words, a feeling of disconnection between what you do all day and who you feel you really are and what you think you'd ideally be able to contribute to existence. Modern work is insecure. Capitalism makes the human being utterly expendable, just one factor among others in the form.
I want to pause it there and chime in. Something about the modern work environment and the time in which Karl Marx wrote his famous works with Frederick Engels, Das Kapital, and the Communist Manifesto was a time of great societal upheaval, especially in terms of work. During the 1830s till the 1850s, during the Industrial Revolution, a lot of men and women who had these amazing little cottage industries for years and years were getting upended by the factory model. They'd have a skill or a trade that they'd practiced perhaps for generations, being a blacksmith or a candle maker or a weaver was very common. And then you had things like the invention of the power loom, which completely made weaving and handmade cloth obsolete. Nobody wanted handmade cloth where you'd pay a much higher price for than industrial textile made cloth. So everybody was moving out of their little cottage industries. They were moving into factories. And Marx was like, there's a lot of people out of work. There's a lot of people who are living in poverty. We're seeing a greater division between the rich and the poor. So I just wanted to provide that context for the time when Marx was living. Now I'll continue to play it.
Of production, and one that can ruthlessly be let go the minute that costs rise or savings can be made through technology. And yet, as Marx knew deep inside each of us, we don't want to be arbitrarily let go. We're terrified of being abandoned. Communism isn't just an economic theory. Understood emotionally, it expresses a deep-seated longing that we always have a place in the world's heart, that we will not be cast out. Workers get paid little, while capitalists get rich. This is perhaps the most obvious qualm that Marx had with capitalism. In particular, he believed that capitalists shrink the wages of the labourers as much as possible in order to skim off a wide profit margin. He called this primitive accumulation, ursprüngliche Akkumulation.
Another item to give this context is, again, the time that Marx was living in. There's a couple of books I'd like to point out. A book written by George Orwell about that same time period was called The Road to Wigan Pier, and it showed how incredibly awful mining conditions were at that time. Men would often get black lung, and they would their lungs would fill up with soot, and they would die very young working in mines. People would get mangled in factories. There was no mandatory working day, so people would work 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. And it was there was no protection. And so he saw this industrialized model, and he saw something that could be far more compassionate, benevolent, which was giving the means of control of production over to the state to mandate worker safety.
And what you're stealing is the talent and hard work of your workforce. However much one dresses up the fundamentals, Marx insists that at its crudest, capitalism means paying a worker one price for doing something and then selling it to somebody else at a much higher price. Profit is the fancy term for exploitation. Capitalism is very unstable. Marx proposed that capitalist systems are characterized by a series of crises. Every crisis is dressed up by capitalists as being somehow freakish and rare and soon to be the last one. Far from it, argued Marx. Crises are endemic to capitalism, and they're caused by something rather odd. The fact that we're able to produce too much, far more than anyone needs to consume. Capitalist crises are crises of abundance, rather than, as in the past, crises of shortage. Our factories and systems are so efficient we could give everyone on this planet a car, a house, access to a decent school and a hospital. And that's what so enraged Marx, but also made him so hopeful too. Few of us actually need to work because the modern economy is so productive. But rather than seeing this need not to work as the freedom it is, we complain about it masochistically and describe it by a pejorative word, unemployment. We should call it freedom. There's so much unemployment for a good and deeply admirable reason, because we're so good at making things efficiently. We're not all needed at the coalface. But in that case, we should, thought Marx, make leisure admirable. We should redistribute the wealth of the
All right. Just want to point out, it's interesting that they bring up this idea that work and unemployment should be looked at in a positive light instead of a negative light. I've interviewed, if you follow this channel, dozens upon dozens of homeless people. And the youngest, most able-bodied homeless people I interview, they usually say the same thing. I'm homeless by choice. This is my lifestyle choice. I'd rather work here than go work under fluorescent lights at a Walmart or at a call center, at an Amazon fulfillment center. Why should I help these greedy capitalists gain more profits? And it's a sentiment that you can see has really been distilled down to them, that they believe strongly that capitalism in its nature is a form of slavery, and that they believe it's sort of evil. And I'll just leave it at that. I'll play the end of this now. I think you'll see how these ideas, while Marx was alive, were not popular ideas, but they became popular long after he died.
Teach all of us to be anxious, competitive, conformist, and politically complacent. Marx didn't only outline what was wrong with capitalism. We also get glimpses of what Marx wanted the ideal utopian future to be like. In his Communist Manifesto, he describes a world without private property or inherited wealth, with a steeply graduated income tax, centralized control of the banking, communication, and transport industries, and free public education. Marx also expected that communist society would allow people to develop lots of different sides of their natures. In communist society, it's possible for me to do one thing today and another tomorrow, to hunt in the morning, fish in the afternoon, rear cattle in the evening, criticize after dinner, just as I have a mind without ever becoming hunter, fisherman, herdsman, or critic. After Marx moved to London, he was supported by his friend and intellectual partner Friedrich Engels, a wealthy man whose father owned a cotton plant in Manchester. Engels covered Marx's debts and made sure his works were published. Capitalism paid for communism. The two men even wrote each other adoring poetry. Marx was not a well-regarded or popular intellectual in his day. Respectable, conventional people of Marx's day would have laughed at the idea that his ideas could remake the world. Yet, just a few decades later, they did. His writings became the keystone for some of the most important ideological movements of the 20th century. But Marx was like a brilliant doctor in the early days of medicine. He could recognize the nature of the disease, although he had no idea how to go about curing it. At this point in history, we should all be Marxists, in the sense of agreeing with his diagnosis of our troubles. But we need to go out and find the cures that really will work. As Marx himself declared, and we deeply agree, philosophers until now have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it.
I like another quote by Winston Churchill. Capitalism is unfair, it is unkind, and it is awful, except for the fact that it's better than every other system devised by mankind. And that's just true. Marxism sounds amazing. It sounds great. It sounds appealing. Everybody would rather spend the majority of the time during their day and their life doing what they want to do to fulfill your inherent pleasure and need and your desires to go out and have fun. And I feel that every beautiful day like today. I feel like I want to be on my bike. I want to go out hiking. I want to loaf around the house, spend time with my dogs, watch my chickens. I want to do anything but sit in front of a computer. But I have to earn a living, and everybody probably watching, most of you need to earn a living. And this idea to earn a living, I think we got this sense during COVID what it feels like to not have to earn a living when we're getting this check and we just go out and do what we feel like. And that felt pretty great. When you had that money in your bank account, you didn't have to earn. It was just there and you could just do what you felt like. Why not just do that, have that money available? And here's the problem. Marxism and socialism sounds great until you run out of other people's money. So somebody has to, Margaret Thatcher, again from the UK, said that. She was the Prime Minister of the UK in the 1980s. And the point is that your lifestyle has to be paid for. And I absolutely support like the van life movement and the tiny home movement. Why don't we make our lifestyle footprint smaller so we can spend more time doing the things we love? I met a painter up in Helper, Utah, who moved there and bought a building for $30,000 and just so he could spend all his days painting. But you should not expect somebody else to pay for your lifestyle. You shouldn't expect the government to pay for your lifestyle. That's of course my opinion. So that is the spirit of Marxism. It sounds great, right? But how do you pay for it in a way that is just and fair, that doesn't weigh down and burden entrepreneurs? So now I want to shift gears and let's look at the spirit of capitalism. What is the spirit of capitalism? Is it innately unfair? Is it innately racist? Should we give up on capitalism? I found a pretty decent video. I'm reading a book right now called The Spirit of Capitalism, and it's about Max Weber. So I want to show you this video.
Those who pursue religion often turn away from worldly affairs. They're suspicious of wealth and business, preferring an ascetic life of contemplation and prayer. The sociologist and economist Max Weber argued that after the Reformation, one form of Christian Protestantism, Calvinism, encouraged a different attitude to work, with far-reaching effects. Calvinists believed in predestination. A precise number of souls would go to heaven. The lucky ones had places reserved by God. However, most Calvinists were terrified there would be no seat awaiting them in paradise. They were always on the lookout for signs that they had been saved. One clear indication that they were on the guest list was that they were actively contributing to their community through their work. In his book, The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, Weber argued that the Calvinists' need to reassure themselves through their industry was an important factor in the growth of capitalism in Northern Europe. They built up businesses that generated wealth, but at the same time lived thrifty lives. They reinvested any surplus and so helped fuel capitalism. Eventually, capitalism would have a life and momentum of its own. But according to Weber at least, its initial impetus came from a theological source.
Okay. And credit to the BBC for doing that. So Max Weber, that book was written way back in 1905, The Spirit of Capitalism. And that's when he came to the United States and visited what was going on here and noticed the really flourishing industries happening in Europe at the time as well. And the commonality he found was that people innately really felt a purpose from their jobs and their work and their profession and their given trade. People who especially felt that way were these Protestant Calvinists. They thought that their work, their vocation was sort of their calling. And it's a nice idea to think that, if you believe in God, God puts you down here in this time and this place. He gives you this brain and this intellect and these abilities, and sometimes you identify that you have special abilities to do certain things and you're not good at other things. So why not identify how to use your innate abilities to find an outlet to do something really unique and special in the world? Or find the vocation that matches your abilities best in the world. And that is the Protestant work ethic, and to work very hard and diligently at that thing that you feel like you are called to do, and identify your calling as not just something you're doing to earn a paycheck, but it's sort of a calling by God to fulfill and manifest your human potential in the best possible way. And so we've done, these series of podcasts for the Other Side Academy, who take hardened criminals who are spending 30 years in prison, who were drug addicts and basically couldn't find any job they liked. And this Other Side Academy, their whole goal is to tap human potential and help people realize that they can function and flourish and be happy in the world. And I think the more you believe that you are owed, or society owes you something, and you should just be able to do whatever you feel like, the more Marxist you are. The more you believe that you have something special to offer the world, and you have to find your own innate drive and desire to fulfill that God-given talent and ability, the more capitalist you are. I think a lot of people want to divide the world into Democrat, Republican. I think it's better to understand it in the spirit of everybody wants to live in a good world. Everybody wants to live in a fair and a just world. The idea that we're going to take from the few and give to the many, of course that sounds fair, but why not make the idea, let's make the marketplace and the free market more fair for everybody, so everybody can fulfill their dreams in starting a business, in overcoming hardships, in becoming very skilled at what they're doing. I just think there's these two competing mindsets at work here, and one's about taking and one's about giving. And am I wrong in that? But I just feel like the essence of Marxism sounds wonderful, but the core of it is about taking. The essence of capitalism is about giving, and giving yourself over to a vocation. So I'd love to hear your comments below. We are actually going to be having a debate on this issue. I'm going to be a moderator of a debate between a capitalist and a Marxist, and we are planning out the venue. We're planning out where it's going to be. I'm really excited about it because I don't claim, just so you know, to be an intellectual or an expert. I'm just a guy asking questions, right? So I don't know all the answers. You're basically on this journey with me. I just know what I look at and I read and I study and I come to conclusions. And if you want to criticize my thought and my logic, I appreciate you do that because I love getting comments like that. So with that, I want to tell you this podcast is brought to you by Utah Stories Magazine. This is our monthly magazine. We produce the voices of local Utah inside the pages. I got lucky enough to go on a trip down the Cataract Canyon with Sherry Griffith River Adventures. I got to write that story. We have a lot of excellent stories about small businesses. We highlight the best of local Utah every single month. I think this is how you embrace the spirit of capitalism, support locally owned businesses. And then if you subscribe to this for $5 a month, you actually really help us continue to produce this journalism and produce the magazine. And Clark's Auto on the back, I have to plug them always. And then Faces of Utah magazine is our new magazine that's mailed out to 15,000 high-end homes throughout Salt Lake, but we'd love to be able to mail this out to more folks. So if you want to become a member of Utah Stories for $10 a month, we'll send you this magazine every 6 months. And the feature story is about the Other Side Academy, who I just told you about. These guys, Tim, David, and Joseph, started this incredible academy where they reform the lives of hardened criminals, and they are making a huge difference with their social enterprises. We just went to their donut shop today. We've got donuts we're going to be giving out, and we went to their village. They created a Other Side Village, which puts up formerly homeless people. It's just an amazing model for tapping human potential. Really happy to work with those guys. And then we also have all these other incredible stories about movers and shakers, women in politics. We've got stories about buying affordable housing from Asha Cleric. She was on the podcast. And then our friends at Taggy Farm, Thane Taggy. We've got to spend a day hanging out with Thane. It was really awesome. He's just such an enthusiastic, amazing farmer in Utah. I think he's tapped into what he's innately good at. And so anyway, both of these publications are about tapping into your human potential. So I encourage you to subscribe, become a